It's Friday, April 6th. Today on the Broke Canadian Newscast,
we will be covering Tobaccogate, or, the tobacco
Scandal.
Don't
ever call anything gate on my watch. Cell phone trackers in Ottawa.
And Venezuela.
I'm Bandringer.
And I'm the Dino Man.
And this is...
the Broke
Canadian Newscast! I forgot to go in on the broke.
Money to spare, discussing local to world affairs. There's Bandringer first with the Dino Man last. Here's the Broke Canadian Newscast. So, now my turn. How was your week?
My week was wonderful. Relaxed. Watched a Louis C.K. stand-up special on Netflix last night.
You actually have work hours now, don't you?
No, not really.
No?
I mean, I cleaned some eavesdrops yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been working all that much. But all that free time has managed me to get up to Silver Rank 1 in Heroes of the Storm. I am one step. I'm like 4 or 5 wins away from the Gold Leagues, where people might actually know how to play the game and don't just wander around for no reason and know that they should defend their fort and that objectives are important.
Team players and all that.
Yeah, exactly. What has your week been like?
No, it's been a good week again. Actually, I got to go out to Elk Island yesterday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, with a friend, and we had a pretty good time. It actually was a nice day, and it was warm, and so...
It's been fairly nice weather. I remembered the other thing I was going to mention.
Oh, okay.
This is great. Some story time with Brent. So yesterday, actually, while I was doing eavesdrops, we went back to the boss's house to grab a break. He wanted a smoke and a coffee or whatever, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at my phone. I always got a call from this random number that I don't recognize. So that I call back. And it's some trivia thing for a radio station. I'm immediately suspicious, but I go through it like they asked me 3 questions. Easy questions about music. I answered them and they're like, "You've won a free cruise." I'm like, I didn't ever think I won anything.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it. This is a fairly elaborate scheme, it seems like. Because you go to the website, it's Rush 102 FM.
Ooh.
Rush 102 FM. It's not based anywhere. It's just an internet radio station. In fact, if you go to the station, you can even, listen to the radio-ish thing. I'm not even sure if they actually have DJs or anything, but, it'll play pop music on there.
Oh.
And they seem to have, I'm 99.9% sure it's some sort of scam to try to get people to pay, the boarding tax fees on cruise tickets that they think they won. And, yeah, it's a
rather intricate scam.
The main red flag for me is that you can pick up your cruise tickets and all you need is the confirmation number is just your phone number. Which is not something any contest worth its salt would ever do.
No.
Because a lot of people know my phone number. It's fairly the website looks pretty good, so just be aware, I guess. But yeah.
Another interesting thing on my radar is I am actually doing a Passover thing tomorrow, which will be an interesting little celebration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm exhausted, but it's basically like a 3-hour dinner. So
a lot of food.
Yeah.
There's unleavened bread, as I understand.
There's unleavened bread and not real wine because,
Because your cohort is not generally the winey type?
Not as much, no.
Is there a lamb? I don't know.
Yeah, Passover lamb, of course.
There has to be a lamb,
yeah,
right?
There's lamb.
And bitter herbs, I think.
Bitter herbs, yeah, you got that.
I've read Exodus once or twice. I remember things. Alright, I think we've BS'd enough. I think let's dive right into here.
So, to start off, I guess we have some updates for some stories that we had worked on.
Yeah, we have lots and lots and lots of updates. Alright, so we had mentioned when we were talking about Jason Kenney, his comments on GSAs. There's a little bit of back and forth in the provincial legislature among with the Wild Rose leader.
Yeah. So Brian Jean has basically come out and said it's not appropriate to do what Kenney was proposing, enforcing schools to tell parents when kids join GSAs. Now, there have been some Wild Rose members that have actually come in favor of Kenney's proposal there.
Yeah, well, and Brian Jean's wiffle waffles a little bit. His most recent statement says it's only appropriate when the child says that they can, and in cases where the child is at risk of self-harm. Those are the two cases. So this has kind of been a bit of an ongoing issue in the province.
I mean, Kenny himself has arguably distanced himself from these comments as well, so...
Yeah, it's just a kind of back and forth on that. As well, the Conservative Senator Lynn Byack has now resigned from the Senate Aboriginal Peoples Committee. This was called for from most sectors of government after her remarks. Oh, removed? Oh,
she was removed.
She was removed by the Conservative caucus.
Yeah. In
the Senate. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is basically good, considering what we were talking about, and her statements. This at least gives her less clout in that area.
Yeah, she was removed by her own party from the committee for the statements that she said. In more local news, there was a vote from the Rural Municipalities Association in Saskatchewan that said that due to the rising crime rates, they want to add a person's right to defend himself to include property.
Yes. Now this goes right into our story about Colton Bushy.
Yes, where property was, I suppose, being defended in that case.
Yeah. Allegedly.
Allegedly. Well, that's, I think, what he would say. So, anyway. Now, this is not on the government radar. Federally. This would have to be a federal jurisdiction, and it's not on the federal public safety minister's radar. It's not going to even get to a provincial level. The federal justice and public safety ministers are not going to put anything into place, but it's interesting to see the attitude that in rural Saskatchewan about these type of incidences.
Yes. I guess in some of the international news, considering what we were covering last week, Devin Nunes, who is the House Intelligence Chairman, is stepping down from the Russia investigation, and we had mentioned the issues and possible collusion or
ethics
violations or just interest
conflict of
interest. Yeah.
So he stepped down from the Russia investigation. There's also been more slinging about the possible when Nunes had said that some Trump officials had been surveilled. There's more news about that. There's news that Susan Rice, who is a former national security advisor and also former U.S. ambassador to the UN, had asked that Trump official names be unmasked from intelligence that she had reviewed. These were not unmasked to the entire public, just unmasked for people that have clearance to view this intelligence. The reasons why she did that are not known. She says it was not political, but of course, right-wing and Trump officials are claiming that it was political.
Attempt to slander,
that kind of thing. So that's kind of where that story has developed. As a result, the new Benghazi, the new emails that you see from Fox News and other right-wing leaning sites is Susan Rice and unmasking. That's what you're going to be seeing for the next year. So just be aware. Get ready for it.
Yeah. And then finally, I think one of the bigger pieces of news is that Steve Bannon has actually been stripped of his National Security Council role. Now, as I understand, he still maintains his
advisor role,
as well as his security status, like in terms of clearance and such. However, he has been stripped, and some of those people who had been previously deposed a month or 2 months ago from their roles on the National Security Council have been reinstated.
Yes.
Now, there have been arguments of why this was, what happened, who's in control of all this. But really what we know is the change has happened. I mean, there are some of the more conservative Trump-leaning aspects tout that what Bannon was sent there to do, he has accomplished. So it's back to the usual there. But, one could wonder if that was inappropriate, an inappropriate appointment, and this is now being rectified.
Yeah, there's speculation that this might have to do with infighting among Trump advisors and associates. And, this is kind of a return to the status quo. You got possibly the new national security advisor, and honestly, a lot of the national security / defense team that Trump has are fairly well-respected individuals. The Secretary of Defense, Mad Dog Mathis is, despite the name, a very a well-respected individual in the defense community.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a return to the status quo in that area. That's about all we have for updates. I suppose we could briefly mention Trump's airstrikes into Syria in response to the Syrian chemical weapons attack.
That is on our radar, but it's not being covered this week. We've had enough Trump.
We've done 2 straight weeks of Trump. We didn't want to do 3 straight weeks of Trump. So, that's, I guess, the preamble out of the way.
Yes.
And that is a lengthy preamble. Let's get into the meat of the issue.
And on to our local news. So, Tobaccogate.
Why does everything need a date? You can choose your own words in that space. You can choose how vulgar you want them to be. We try to keep it somewhat clean on this podcast, but if you have a filthy mind, fill that space with whatever you want.
Yeah. We talked about actually Watergate last week and how that actually got its name because it's by a hotel. But this is the controversy one of the controversies that surrounded Alison Redford.
Can I interrupt? I want to interrupt. You know what I want? You know what I want?
I know it's coming.
I want there to be a scandal about the outer fence, and specifically the doorway in the outer fence, of a certain Microsoft founder's home. You know why? You know why, Christian?
I know why.
So we can have a Gatesgategate.
Yes, a Gatesgategate.
Because it's honestly no less stupid than putting gate in front of frickin' everything.
Usually it's put afterward, actually.
Okay. I mean...
Anyways.
Are we gonna... We could do...
Well, at least when Canada had the big sponsorship issue, we called it the sponsorship scandal.
We could just call it the sponsorship scandal. Actually,
so the tobacco scandal, or alleged tobacco scandal, the something she's been cleared of. Anyway.
Are we gonna start doing the Gazi thing now? Because that's another thing.
No.
I've seen a few Gazis.
Gamer Gazi is a subreddit.
I'm sure there's been 1 or 2 more Gazis.
Yeah. Anyways. Back to the story.
Okay.
These allegations came out after she had already left, but they were over the choice of the lawyers to represent the big lawsuit against the tobacco companies on behalf of the provinces to recoup some medical costs associated with smoking.
Yes.
So the issue was, it was felt that the the firm chosen to represent Alberta was third on the list of the 3 that they were considering, was pretty much out of the running, but got chosen.
Yes.
And there were some ties seen between them and Alison Redford.
Specifically, I believe her husband was
her ex-husband.
Ex-husband, okay.
Yeah, so her former husband, Robert Hawkes, was a partner in one of the firms.
Oh, yeah.
But there was an investigation done from BC. It was trying to be as nonpartisan and unbiased as possible, and the results or the conclusions just came back, and she was cleared of any of these allegations that were put forward actually by a CBC investigative journalism story that purported that this choice was not done based on merit.
Yes.
However, they found that they didn't release everything, but she was observing other aspects that weren't covered in the CBC journalism story.
Yeah, it turns out that Alison Redford was not and could not have made that decision directly. Now, these allegations stem not from when she was premier, but from when she was justice minister.
Yeah.
Her premiership was marked with a lot of expense-type scandals, which were one of the main reasons for her resignation after winning an election against the Wild Rose Party. Mm-hmm. But her expense scandals that sort of headed off with her using taxpayer money to head to Nelson Mandela's funeral, and then just developing stories about housing, about expenses, about salaries of staffers, about all that kind of stuff.
And that's really the reason we brought up this story. It's kind of a non-story because she was cleared of charges. There's nothing here. But the story of Alison Redford and her short, 26-month stay?
29, I believe.
29-month stay in power. This has really brought about the beginning of the Wild Rose.
At least the surge of the Wild Rose.
This brought about the surge of the Wild Rose, as well as is really what is making it difficult for Kenney to currently try to merge the 2 parties.
Yeah.
Because the Conservatives in their death throes of their government were marked by a lot of different scandals, and particularly Redford's premiership is the crux of a lot of them. Yeah. So as you said, the issues came to light when she did spend $45,000, I believe it was, on a trip to Nelson Mandela's funeral. But that went on, and one of the ones I remember quite fondly was actually Sky Palace, which was the name the media gave to this large penthouse that she was slated to try to have built. I remember from the original news that this was actually purported to be a way of hosting delegates, and it was supposed to be some sort of governmental sort of facilities. However, the arrangements of it all was really just to house her and her teenage daughter. That was how it was set up. And this thing wasn't, a few $100,000. This was in $2.6 million, I believe. Sorry, $2.76 million.
Yeah.
That was the cost allocated for this. And one of the interesting things about this story is even as it was leaked, the construction and everything didn't delay, so it ultimately did get made. And so there were some jokes afterwards about people having tours and paying for tours to help recoup some of the cost, and some people were joking about ways that they could give Sky Palace back to the taxpayers.
Yeah. Honestly, these types of stories do not bother me as much as I think most people.
Yeah.
I find these stories are almost like laser focused and tailor made to enrage the public. And, it's bad, and it should enrage the public to some degree, for sure.
Well, I mean, Alison Redford, at the end, her approval rating was, 15% or something, 19 maybe? It was abysmal.
Yeah, and use of public assets it's sort of the classic, the politician abusing their power,
mm-hmm.
using their position in order to get perks for themselves. It speaks to, I think, everyone in a very visceral base, like, they are doing something terrible, and we should definitely rise up against. Interestingly, Trump seems entirely almost immune to that, but that's another...
No, there's been actually a lot of talk about how his wife is staying in the Trump Tower.
Well, I feel like that both the wife staying in the Trump Tower and his constant trips to Mar-a-Lago
they get a decent amount of coverage.
In Florida, they get some coverage, but I don't think they get coverage on Reddit. Let's just say that.
Okay, fair enough.
They're not front page CNN material. Or front page anything material. Whereas you compare that to the Alison Redford thing, and that was local paper. I mean, it's a local story, but that was local paper fodder, CBC Edmonton fodder, Edmonton Journal fodder for months and months and months.
Yeah.
That's just how I'm saying.
And I see what you're saying, especially because really when it comes to government, there is a bit of waste of money here, but we just went through the budgets. We know how much a few $100,000, even a few million actually mean in the grand scheme of things.
It doesn't affect. If you're doing a good job, then if you are abusing public expenses, I'm not saying you should abuse public expenses.
No.
But I'm just saying that if you're doing a good job, I don't care too much. If you're abusing public expenses, pay back what you can and don't do it anymore, and I'm fine if you're doing a good job. Now, one could argue if Alison Redford was doing a good job, there was wider displeasure with the direction of the economy, which is in general what sinks politicians more than anything else, is the direction of the economy, whether the politician had anything to do with it or not.
And especially if you're a conservative leader, a lot of things that unite the conservatives, be it libertarians or social conservatives, is their fiscal conservatism.
Yeah.
And she was failing to them on that point.
Well, if you're cutting public services at the same time as you're sort of enriching yourself with the public offers, that looks absolutely terrible. And I understand why it looks terrible, but again, if you're doing a good job, I'm not as nonplussed about it as others, let's just say.
Who's the politician that said that everyone should be tightening their belts or whatnot? What was the recent politician?
Was that look in the mirror? I think that was a Jim Prentice.
That was the Prentice.
That was the look in the mirror Jim Prentice thing.
Which did not go well for him.
Yeah, not much that he did went fairly well. He managed to... it's amazing. I made this comment earlier to you before the story. It's amazing how many people in Canadian politics managed to fail the more charisma than Stephen Harper test, which is a low bar. And this is coming from someone who has some degree of affection for Stephen Harper. But the man is not very charismatic, but somehow Canadian politicians manage to have less charisma. Rachel Notley, I think, actually has a decent amount of charisma.
She does.
Or hate. Or hate. I'd say
she's
actually...
got a fairly vivacious kind of appearance. Like, she kind of goes out there, she's very excited and happy every time she's speaking.
I don't think Brian Jean has any charisma.
He's always struck me as rather gentle and reasonably good demeanor.
I mean, it's true. I don't...
And I mean, he on the campaign trail especially, he did try to crack some jokes, and some were hits, some were misses.
I don't remember any hits.
Oh, hits.
I don't remember.
There's a pun there, but yeah.
I also haven't seen much of Jason Kenney speak, so I cannot speak to his...
No, I don't know at all.
You know who I think had the charisma?
Here we go.
I had a strong affection for as a right-wing leader in Alberta.
Who?
His name is Ed Stelmach. He left politics pretty much just because he was done. He stuck in there. He managed to last, I believe, longer than both Alison Redford and Jim Prentice.
I'm pretty sure.
And he did that while following Ralph Klein, the most beloved premier...
King Ralph.
One of the most beloved premiers in Canadian political history.
Yep.
And it looked kind of shaky there for a while. He almost failed the leadership review, but he persevered.
Yeah, no, he pulled through and he did quite well at the end of that leadership review. There wasn't that he almost failed, it was that they were worried about it.
Yeah, exactly. But he got plus 75 cents, then he quit. I looked up what he was doing. Apparently he's the lead of the Covenant Catholic Hospital Board.
Yeah, Health Board, yeah. Which is, I mean, he's a old Eastern Catholic kind of background guy. A good old Ukrainian farmer.
He's a Ukrainian farmer, and full disclosure, I grew up in Tofield. Steady Eddie was my MP for most of my life. So I have a little bit of affection that comes from that. But also, you know what? He always seemed like a decent guy. He wouldn't do any of this expense stuff.
No.
He just...
Well, I mean, when we were looking up what we were doing, you were half debating if he just went back to, farming.
I honestly was wondering if he just went back to his farm.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, I think that's enough about Steady Eddie. Much as I just want to rant about how much I like Steady Eddie, I think we should go on to our next story. Quick addendum, we did some fact-checking and found out that good old Steady Eddie resigned over a bit of a showdown over a deficit budget with his finance minister at the time and also a leadership rival in the 2006 PC leadership race, Ted Morton.
Yes, Ted Morton had felt like it was a bit of a rocky reign, and he was a staunch social and fiscal conservative and was a little upset about the direction, I think.
The direction, specifically him not returning to a surplus budget in a quick enough time. So, just a little addendum before we go on to our next story.
All right, so on to our national news. In our national news, we have this story. If you've all paid attention to the CBC, you've seen this bit of investigative journalism that they've undertaken. And it's actually that they found out that there have been these devices called IMSI devices, which are actually used to spy on cell phones.
Could you give me the nickname of these ISMI devices?
Oh, IMSI. They're Stingrays. It's a certain model, but that's kind of like Hoover in Britain. You call vacuums Hoovers.
I was going to go with Kleenex.
Or Kleenex, yeah.
That's a more direct example that people actually know.
Hoover is, I don't know.
Or
it's
like
a device.
Or like your aunt calling every video game a Nintendo.
Yes, exactly. So these IMSI catchers, what they basically do is they spoof being a cell tower.
Yep.
And through that, and pinging back with your phone, back and forth, they'll actually be able to tell which phones are around. And then by the people controlling them being able to see who's around which area at which time, can find out the likely people who are actually working in the area by tracking each cell's individual signature. And then can use this information to actually sometimes listen in on calls and access text messages and stuff and get call history logs as well. So these are used by about 4 groups. So one of the groups that uses them are obviously spy services, right?
Yes.
Both foreign and domestic. Police services can also use them, and Canadian police have used them in the past in One of the more high-profile cases was actually when a notorious New York mobster was killed outside Montreal.
Yeah.
They used them in that investigation.
Yeah.
They also can be used by the criminal element. I'm sure they're fantastic for getting blackmail information.
Yes, definitely.
Or just tracking people who are trying really hard not to be tracked.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of groups that have been using it. So CBC basically found out through using a cryptophone, which is a phone that seems like a normal cell phone, but it'll emit a signal when it actually detects one of these fake cell phone towers.
Okay.
And so they were using this to detect when they were around. Now, these fake devices only have a range of about half a click.
Okay.
So they don't actually go too far. And so through their use, they were finding that they were almost assuredly targeted at people around Parliament Hill. The Prime Minister's office is also under effect, as well as the National Defense Headquarters, and as well as actually the U.S. and Israeli embassies would be within range of these trackers.
Okay.
So their next question was then, obviously, who's behind this? Who's doing this? So, first instinct, contact Canadian agencies that might be a part.
Yeah.
So, Ottawa Police, RCMP.
CSIS?
CSIS, yes,
That's
our
great.
spy services.
CSIS is a good name.
CSIS is it's really good. It's really good for a spy agency. I mean, it sounds a little bit like ISIS, which is also a spy agency before it became famous for being a terrorist organization.
Well, a fictional site.
Well, it's fictional, but yeah, still a spy agency.
Okay.
But anyways, they contacted them as well as a few other security agencies in Canada, and they all have officially denied either use in that specific area or use in general of these MSI catchers.
Yep.
So the RCMP and the CSIS have actually undertaken investigations at this point themselves, spurred on by CBC's testimonies and knowledge investigation here. So this is a really interesting story when it hit, because these are potentially really dangerous for national security, like breaching that. And the options that are still on the table are criminal element, which isn't great, or foreign spies. And Russia has actually been known to use these catchers in Canada before.
Yeah, I believe these catchers were actually even used by certain security and policing services around Standing Rock as well.
Yes. Yeah, and that was done by Canadian...
Well, by the U.S.
By the U.S., but CSIS was actually there, right?
Well, yes, there was a recent story in Vice that CSIS were surveilling the Standing Rock protests and pipeline protests in the States in general. This makes some sense because there's going to be pipelines being built throughout Canada, and they wanted to see sort of how the protests and even some of the sabotage which was happening in some cases. People were going into pipeline areas and turning off valves to kind of sabotage their construction and operation. So just to, I guess, see how that's being done, and if it's going to happen here, how they would stop it, I guess. So that's just a note. So
yeah, because CSIS has denied it, it's unlikely, at least, I would say, that Canadian spies are undertaking this, because they probably might say, oh, we were doing some operations there or something.
Yeah.
So the investigation seems in our way, and so, I mean, honestly, to me, probably criminal or foreign spies, both of which cannot be good, so it's really good that this came to light, and there's not really much that it affects our lives, being poor broke guys in Edmonton.
In Alberta. Yeah.
In Alberta. However, it is sometimes scary to understand the level at which, monitoring can happen, and encryption, we were talking before with the whole CIA leak and how the CIA can get through encryption just by bypassing it. There are plenty of ways that electronic communications can be surveilled. I mean, nothing is safe when you put it on the internet, even if you think it's safe. A bunch of celebrities, unfortunately, found that out a few years back.
It's true. I mean, quite recently in the States, some privacy protections were lifted so that internet providers could sell off browsing history.
Yeah.
Aside, I'm just showing me this article, and I love the name of the gangster in the New York Times that was killed.
It's so good. It's such a great gangster, and he even has a great nickname.
Salvatore Montagna?
It's Montagna.
Montagna. And his nickname is Sal the Ironworker. Doesn't that just scream like it should be in a Goodfellas movie?
Yeah, it's so good.
I haven't actually seen Goodfellas.
Oh, that is also good, too.
Okay.
Goodfellas is fantastic. There's a few really good scenes in there.
Yeah.
The pistol whipping one is definitely the most brutal scene I've seen in a movie. not the most brutal, but amongst them.
Okay, there you go. That you know how to sell a movie to me. The pistol whipping is brutal. That's a great way to sell a movie. Is there anything else you want to go on this story?
No, I mean, when the RCMP did use IMSI trackers, there was court authorization and whatnot as well. So in terms of being, I guess, afraid Canadian agencies are using it against you, I would say that there's a lot less chance. Like, there are proper channels.
Yes.
That's why the CBC was able to ask and get confirmation that they were not spying, because there are proper channels.
Yeah.
And granted, with the spy agency, one could argue that they still do some sort of covert, what's the, a bit of subterfuge kind of ways.
Yes.
But
there's been a lot of question about the oversight of Canadian spy agencies lately, about whether they're being properly overseen, whether they stop anything that it's determined to be out of bounds, that kind of thing. So there is some concern there. I think that's about all we have to say. Let's move on to some things that are even more depressing. What do you think?
Oh, all right, folks, be wary. This is a heavy one.
It's pretty heavy. Our international story is the shortages and political crisis in Venezuela. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to start before everything started going downhill. Hugo Chavez died in 2013. He was a longtime dictator of Venezuela, longtime communist dictator.
Now, this was an actual dictator by the government's, a mission, right?
Well, he was president and he had elections, but he was a dictator.
Okay.
Fairly beloved figure. Because Venezuela has the largest oil reserve of any country in the world, they were quite rich. And because of that, they managed to create a functioning socialist government that gave away a lot of things for free. And although there was a fair amount of corruption, they managed to create a fairly robust middle class.
And this was just because they had so much money coming in, they could afford to hemorrhage a lot of money due to corruption.
Yes, and there was corruption at every level. There was corruption where oil money and royalties weren't actually going to government. There was high-ranking government, military, and police forces accepted bribes and just kind of took money that was supposed to go to government and the people. But Venezuela could afford it. And then the oil prices started going down. And that caused huge problems because now the government can't afford to give a lot of these things away for free.
Yeah.
And then people can't afford to buy it from private companies. They're not used to that. And that just got worse and worse. When the government tried to do a few things to fix it, everything they've done has backfired. After Chavez's death in 2013, there was an election. Maduro, who was the prominent official under Chavez's government, won the election, but the election was heavily contested. There was some very rather amusing insults fired back and forth.
Yeah.
Maduro called his opponent gay. His opponent called Maduro's wife ugly. Maduro apparently did a rap. I didn't manage to find that on YouTube, but he did manage to call a rap. And the election kind of shows a popular political tactic of Chavez and...
Chavez, by the way.
Okay. Chavez?
Chavez.
Okay. Yeah. Of Chavez and his party. It's to paint the opposition as in league with the capitalists, in league with the Americas, who were enemies of Venezuela for a long time, did in fact try to overthrow Chavez once or twice.
Yeah. And actually, from perspectives that we heard from people in Venezuela, they treat it very much like a Cold War there. They have that level of animosity and fear towards the United States in particular.
Yeah, United States and the West. It's very much that us versus them that allowed them to stay in power, even if the domestic situation isn't all that great. So, in that rap, Maduro calls his opponent, the opposition leader, a bourgeois. Going to mind classic Marxist, communist insults and invective and rhetoric.
Yeah.
Polemic. There we go. I found some words that work.
Now, the gross mismanagement took place under Chavez or under Maduro, or both?
Well, the corruption happened under Chavez and is very long-standing. But when you start to getting into 2014, the prices started to drop. And the government tried to help with this situation by doing a few things. First, it seized a lot of foreign government assets.
Mm-hmm. And foreign company assets.
Foreign company assets.
Yeah.
For example, ExxonMobil was forced to sell $800 million worth of assets for $250 million. Now, the government didn't know how to manage these assets, so mismanaged them terribly.
Mm-hmm.
And all this turmoil caused the Venezuelan currency, the bolivar, to inflate rapidly.
And we saw the charts of this. It just skyrocketed.
It just skyrocketed, especially very recently.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this, a lot of the wealthy people were changing their bolivars into American dollars, something more stable. The government then prohibited this.
Mm-hmm.
And now, because of all this, nobody is wanting to do business in Venezuela. Because they don't make any money, and any money that they do make, they cannot change it from the bolivar, which is losing value rapidly.
Yeah. They can't, if any, especially outside of Venezuela, if anyone tries to make money, they're stuck with useless chump change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, because of this, nobody's selling anything, nobody's importing any goods that people need into Venezuela. Now, this did not play very well for Maduro and his political party. In fact, in 2015, when they had an election on the Legislative Assembly, think like Congress, think like the House of Commons, even though Maduro remained president, regardless of the result of this election, this is the Legislative Assembly, 2/3 of the legislature was filled by his opposition. But Maduro had a few tricks up his sleeve, let's just say that. On the last day of the lame duck parliament, the parliament that was loyal to Maduro, 13 Supreme Court judges were appointed by the legislature as a last-ditch effort to put more of Maduro loyalists into positions of power in the judiciary branch, I should say, not branch.
And then from this, as I understand, he went on to then, as suddenly the Supreme Court, the new one, issues a ruling that nullified Congress. So basically made this House of Representatives analog or whatever completely impotent.
Yes, this was after the opposition party had been circulating recall petitions throughout the entirety of 2016, which if you look at the polling data that we have from Venezuela, showed that if they did a recall, that Maduro would be out.
Mm-hmm.
Easily because of the terrible situation where there are shortages of everything.
Yeah.
The Venezuelan people are not very happy about this and would recall Maduro if they had the opportunity. But the Venezuelan election agency, which I'm sure answers to Maduro, kept on delaying and suspending this recall for, no reason, I'm sure. No nefarious reason at all.
No.
Now, this nullification of the Congress, which is seen as the last barrier that keeps Maduro from absolute power over every form of government, was actually reversed a day later because of widespread opposition from even Maduro loyalists, including his attorney general, who decried it on state television.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of these, in particular, there is a protest with regards to this one ruling here.
Yeah.
That a young student actually ended up dead.
Yes.
But there have been protests ongoing a long time in the country because of, as you mentioned, there's shortages of everything. And by that, particularly of note, are food shortages, which are abysmal and people are starving, as well as medical shortages. And people, even though the hospital, it's supposed to be a communist area, what's covered under the communism are your beds and your doctors.
Yeah.
And that's it. So medication, food, all that is up to the families. And so that provides all sorts of issues, and without any medication availability, people are just laying in the hospitals dying and moaning.
Yes.
So this has caused widespread protests in here, and people have ended up killed. I mean, Caracas even now is the murder capital of the world.
Yes.
So there's issues. Venezuela is having a real tough go of things right now.
So you have two things that are kind of going on. One is everybody is standing in line for government-subsidized food. And honestly the government-subsidized food. Most of it is being grifted due to corruption by military officials, other contractors that are going to be siphoned off and sold on the black market, which is where, honestly, most people are getting their food. In addition to that, you have Maduro clamping down on protest and clamping down on
dissent,
using police and secret services in order to clamp down on dissent and violently attack journalists. Venezuela is rated near the bottom in terms of journalist freedom right now.
Yeah.
And as far as political opposition, one leader of the opposition is barred from Congress and another is in jail.
Yeah.
So this is the situation you have. You have a dictator that is clinging to power despite popular unrest and dissent, very unpopular leader, using his military and police forces to clamp down on dissent. And then you also have shortages of medication and food, and you have people starving. You have teachers not showing up to work because they are standing in line for food.
Yeah.
You have children going hungry. It is a terrible situation. As far as non-war type situations in the world, it has to rank near the bottom.
Yeah. So what's really causing this problem is, first of all, the economic, as we said, with the oil, the economic situation is not good. All the companies pulling out due to mismanagement, and then the corruption just exacerbates it. And so, like, we're one of the major sources we're using for this was an ABC story, about 20 minutes, where a reporter actually went in and saw a bunch of this firsthand. And the big issue, honestly, the corruption is probably one of the worst issues for making it worse, because without that, there might be a hope for things somewhat stabilizing or getting better.
Yeah.
But because all these government resources, which are supposed to be in like a communist regime, free for the people, are getting siphoned off, and tiny fraction is actually making it out for its intended cost, and the rest of it is actually being sold by other bodies. It basically has a large group of people who are making far less money, but should have their basic needs met, who can't even have their basic needs met. So that is where a whole bunch of the unrest is all coming from. And I mean, it's one of those things where I'm really surprised stories like this are not being covered, because this is brutal. This is human rights violations everywhere.
Yep.
And this is a country on the brink of collapse.
It is. I mean, Maduro is kind of doing the classic thing that Chavez was doing before, blaming the states, blaming other countries for an economic war, saying that no food is getting anywhere because everything's getting sold to Colombia. Colombia has been a big scapegoat for Maduro for all the problems. So when you look at international observers that looking at, he's saying that the figures given by Maduro are grossly an overestimation of how much of food meant for Venezuelans is going to Colombia. He's saying 40%. Other agencies are saying 10. But it's a very clear case of blame, of trying to point the finger at the other in order to justify yourself and your government's own mismanagement and your country's own bad situation. If you can blame somebody else, then you don't have to take the blame.
Yeah. There is obviously, as you said, 10% is the best estimate. There is stuff being siphoned off to Venezuela or to Colombia, and that is obviously an issue. But I mean, that's almost symptomatic of the actual issue with the country,
which is systemic corruption at every level.
Yes,
with the military, every area of government is corruption. You know, we talk about corruption when we talk about Alison Redford and Tobaccogate, and this just cuts you in a little bit of perspective where. You know, Alison Redford is in trouble for possibly misusing government funds and siphoning a legal contract to a friend.
Yeah.
People in Venezuela are in trouble for siphoning off...
Well, they're not in trouble.
They're not in trouble. That's a good point. They are siphoning off food from the people to enrich themselves.
Yeah.
They are, you know, often involved with organized crime. Like, directly. So this is
Well, I mean, technically what they are doing is organized crime in and of itself.
That is very true. The old joke about how politicians are just criminals by another name is actually completely true in this case.
Another thing to this story, too, is I think it serves, now granted this might be some of my politics coming out, but it serves a bit of as a cautionary tale about also relying too much on non-renewable resources for your economy. There is definitely that aspect of the story, and that's honestly where a lot of the initial downturn happened, is as the economy is doing well and oil was high, they were living large, and they were doing well.
Yep.
And I mean, although Alberta definitely is nowhere near in this dire strait, I think there's somewhat analogs as well. I mean, we've talked about when it comes to the budget, we don't have a PST here.
Yeah.
Every other province does, and every other province is, by and large, making less money than us. Well, or for the longest time was making less money than us. And we weren't taking it back into the coffers, and we were just, letting people live richly. And due to the fact when oil made its downturn, all of a sudden that put a bit of a strain on everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to not rely on something that is as volatile as oil prices. I'm not even sure if you even make it as about non-renewable resources. Just anything that has a volatile price. I think most of the examples one can come up with are non-renewable.
But I mean, if you treated like forestry as a non-renewable resources, you could very much end up in the same thing, right? Massive clear cutting, end up with no forest. Where's your lumber industry?
Well, even let's just say that if your entire province's economy was based on forestry, and even if you were a good steward of those resources, and so that you could continue using it and not clear cutting and replanting trees and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
If you're only relying on that one thing, which has a volatile price, that becomes an issue. You need to either do one of two things. You either diversify your economy, one, or you need to save up during the times that they are good so that you have that buffer.
Like farmers of old would, or farmers nowadays would do. Old even.
Yeah, exactly. When you have a good year.
Bumper crop.
Yeah, you save some of the proceeds from that so that if you have a drought year, you can survive. That's, I think just makes good sense. Whereas, Venezuela, nobody cared. Everybody was just living large. I'm not even blaming the people of Venezuela for this. It's mostly about the corruption in the Chavez government.
And especially, we're talking about a communist government here, right? The people aren't near as much to blame because they're literally, the government's just giving them stuff. It's the government that's organizing everything.
Yes.
So
I think if the government wasn't corrupt, they would be fine. They might have to tighten their belt a little bit and do less social benefits.
It would also give them time to develop a good plan to get out of this economic mess instead of the immediate downturn they suffered.
And the immediate, let's do all the things that make everything worse.
Yes.
I think that's about all we have for this story. Do you want to go into something like 500 times lighter?
Yeah. So, I guess in conclusion, be aware of the world, look at world news more, and realize that it's more than just Trump.
More than just Trump. More than just the Middle East even.
Oh, yeah. Although Yemen was still really bad.
Well, we're not just gonna go into literally bad things. I feel like something light and sugary.
So, if you haven't guessed, our news that doesn't matter is the news that doesn't matter for this week. The bloody Pepsi ad.
Yes, it involves two things that definitely don't matter. Kendall Jenner and soft drinks.
Well, unless you're talking about obesity rates, then soft drinks do matter.
Yes, we could get it.
Actually, Kendall Jenner might matter in the opposite, because she is a model, and then there's that whole unrealistic beauty expectation.
You're making this topic much heavier.
Much heavier.
Than it needs to be. So, there was a Pepsi ad that featured Kendall Jenner.
Who is Kendall Jenner?
She is the daughter of Kris Jenner and Bruce Jenner at the time that she was born, but Caitlyn Jenner now. And she is a model, and she has been on Keeping Up with the Kardashians because that's the whole clan.
You didn't say Cardassians this time.
Good job, me. And she's part of that whole family of people that are famous for being famous and then continue to be famous.
Yeah.
I don't actually hate them all that much because, like,
It's the same thing with your government spending. It's like, it's one family that lives rich and doesn't really do anything, but whatever. It doesn't affect me.
Well, yes, but, like, they're in a way earning their money. Let's just say that.
True.
Like, people watch their shows. People buy their crappy mobile game.
A fashion line or whatever.
Reliable game. People, care and they get some enjoyment. And yes, I kind of wish that people didn't, but whatever. Let's talk about the actual ad because this is dumb.
So, I guess, first off, pause now and go see the ad if you haven't.
Yeah.
But if you still aren't going to go see it, I guess let's just go and describe it. One thing I wanted to note off the start, and you agreed with me, is that it's actually really well shot. It's gorgeous. The music flows really well. Like, it's well put together.
It's very well put together. They put a lot of effort into this ad.
A lot of the creative people did very good work for a very soulless company. But anyways, the ad consists of Kendall Jenner at a photo shoot.
Yep.
And a bunch of disparate artistic types kind of doing their art. And then getting roped into this...
I wouldn't say roped into, but getting caught up in this spirit of...
The siren's call.
The siren's call of protest.
Or the peace march or whatever it is.
Or they're protesting, they're doing a protest where they protest. It's very benign.
The signs are so milquetoast, it's unbelievable.
Is it milquetoast or milk and toast?
It's milquetoast.
Is it milquetoast?
Yeah.
Weird. Do you know what language that word comes from? Is it French or is it?
Well, the milk looks like it's spelled the French way, but I don't actually know the language.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, they're so bland as to be
just like peace, love.
Yeah.
Let's talk things out.
And so, like, there's
why you gotta be so rude, man? You're harshing my buzz.
So there's two prominent artists that they show. There's a bunch of others, but there's a cellist and a photographer.
Yes,
and the photographer happens to be Muslim.
Yes, I'm sure that was a deliberate choice.
And the cellist is Asian in background, which we'll actually come into as we discuss this.
Yeah.
And so then they end up joining the march, and it's the cellist that ends up beckoning.
Giving her the
knowing nod.
The knowing nod.
Like, come on over.
Honestly, that it could be like a nod of seduction if they were in a bar. It's like the same look.
Yeah, he does have that look about him. He's got that kind of like, he's not a bad looking man at all.
It's true.
And so he gives her the
I wonder what's happening after this whole event's happened.
Yeah, and then she strips off her wig, and then, how was that pause? It was
great.
And drums off and joins him. And meanwhile, the Pepsi is being shown in everybody's holding a Pepsi here and there.
And they're all dancing and singing in protest of in the protest.
There's like musicians and break dancers and whatever. And
I imagine how general this protest is. That's the thing. One of my main takeaways from this ad is that this is the benign protest.
They did not choose to make a Pepsi ad over a Black Lives Matter protest.
No, it's just, I mean, that's what they're trying to echo, but they're also trying to not echo in it.
Because they don't want to offend too many people, which is, I guess, somewhat ironic.
It is.
Yeah, so anyways, at the very end, Kendall pulls out of this very picturesque bucket of ice with Pepsis, pulls out one, walks up to a line of police officers, and gives the one police officer a Pepsi. And then he proceeds to open it with the sound, and the photographer shows that she takes a picture of this, and
the drinks the Pepsi and smiles.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the picture's supposed to be reminiscent of the old, like, putting the flower in the gun barrel kind of thingies from the hippies.
You know what's different about that? There's actual guns that are being pointed at people. I also have to say, the line of police officers...
It's so non-militaristic.
That's like a line of like...
They're not even in like real, like, what you think of police uniform. They're like wearing ball caps and like...
There's like 20 feet between police officers too. Like, this is not a containment line.
This looks like what you put at like the Santa Claus parade. Like...
Yeah, that's pretty, and you know what? I'm gonna give it credit. The militarization and the level of sternness of the police matches the threateningness of the protest.
It's like a peace march, and then the there must be like the mayor of the city's like, oh, I guess you gotta go put 10 guys on that.
Yeah, you gotta put 10 guys.
Kick over a garbage can.
Make sure no one kicks over a garbage can. I gotta say, I mean, the Women's March had more of a police presence and more threatening signs and more everything. This is just, this came up in a lot of fire because it is basically saying that Pepsi will solve the police violence problem.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
And the other one was actually what we're joking about, in that it really neuters what a protest is. Because it has this happy little peace march with a few people and police that aren't threatening, and it's like the Cartoon Network version of the Women's March. And it basically makes it look like it's not that big of a thing, whereas a lot of people who are involved in these protests are very serious about it.
Well, yeah, and the police are more serious about the protests and trying to make sure they don't seem violent or violently oppressing them and using their power overly much. That was a great sentence. And so it minimizes things on both ends. Now, this, because it's a soft drink ad, and they're obviously trying to be socially conscious in the age of Trump, because they're using every color of the rainbow of skin tone is in this protest.
Well,
so they're obviously trying to ape that. And so it brings to mind the Coke ad from the Super Bowl, which we had discussed earlier.
Yes.
And we actually re-watched in preparation
and it's a beautiful ad.
It's very nice. They show all the races, and they're basically just making the point of diversity. It's cool. Well, and they're making less of they're trying to make less of a point.
Yes.
They're making less of a point because they're just being diversity.
Well, no, the thing actually I would argue is they're actually making a point. Yeah. Because the Pepsi ad was applying imagery, but I don't think there's actually any point to it. I mean, as we talked about, the signs are saying nothing. Whereas the Coke ad, I think it actually was a bit, I wouldn't say abrasive, but it was direct. I mean, has America the Beautiful singing. Yeah. Right? And then it says, not diversity is beautiful. What does it say? Everyone is beautiful, or...
You got this.
What was it?
America, I don't know. Everyone is beautiful, diverse. I don't know.
Together is beautiful. That's what it was. But it's this, the idea of showing all these different races and different religions, because they show distinctly Muslim people and languages, and making that statement that all these people coming together is what America is. That's what they're doing in the kind of the network of all those things coming together. Yes. And the things I loved about it is they had, at the very beginning, they have it's not the national anthem, but it's a very patriotic song.
It's America the Beautiful.
Yeah, America the Beautiful. You're gonna get a lot of your very patriotic, and I would argue tend to be more right-wing, perhaps people that are a little more adverse to aspects of this message, or at least, some of the more extreme levels. And you would actually draw them in because of the patriotism angle. And they are showing plenty of people in situations that everyone can relate to, which I think is the point. And I don't know, it was just a really well succinct ad with a specific point. Whereas this Pepsi ad, you're not having any point. It feels it honestly reminds me a little bit of when Christian media tries to be cool, and they take this thing that looks really cool and they put the Christian veneer over top of it. But they're missing the entire point of it, and it feels so bland, they're just trying really hard to be accepted. Okay. And the Pepsi ad had that feeling of they're trying to make it look so progressive, but in doing so, they actually angered a crap ton of progressives.
Yeah, it basically, I guess it's not trying to make more of a point as opposed to Coke ads. It's just biting off more. The Coke ad is just, okay, diversity. It's cool. That's the, 3-word thing that is less cool than the 3-word together is beautiful that they actually had. But you know what? I like the sound of my own voice and my own phrases. So, you know what? I'm using it. But with Pepsi, they're just biting off so much. They're biting off the imagery of protests and the Women's March. They're biting off the imagery of the Black Lives Matter. And and they're biting off the imagery of police violence.
And on top of that, they had, as we talked about, the whole diversity angle, right?
Yeah.
They have the Muslim photographer, the Asian cellist, and and the beautiful contemporary model that everyone loves. Like, they have all these people coming together, and in the march, they show a whole bunch of diverse people.
Yeah.
Right? So trying that whole angle on top of that?
Yeah, it really just... It's so much. It's so much. It's bloated. It's a long ad.
There's a short version. We did look at the long version.
But still, it's bloated with too much stuff in it. It's just trying to sell a soft drink. Mm-hmm. And it's trying to associate the soft drink with progressive ideals, with protest, with this spirit that is kind of enveloping a lot of America and a lot of urban America.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, it just comes off as, wait for it, flat.
Oh, that was beautiful.
It was beautiful.
That was beautiful.
I think we should end on that.
I think we should.
I really think we should. Are you basking in the glow of that?
I am basking. I can just... Oh, I get this, like, fizzy feeling all over.
You do? Do you after this, do you wanna grab some carbonated beverages?
I think we should grab 2 Cokes.
I think we should.